Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Melinda Crane, and it is a very great honor to accompany you today as moderator. And many thanks to Lerato for that kind introduction. We have heard about a lot of challenges, a lot of strains that add up to some very real and grave questions about the efficacy, the resilience, and the equity of the current development finance model. So to close this opening session of this year's forum, our organizers have put together an outstanding panel of leading stakeholders who are each working within his or her own country, sector, company, institution to try to create the building blocks for a new development model, who are working to leverage those additional resources that have been mentioned so much this morning, who are working to bring the private sector into these areas, into these challenges in an even more intensified and meaningful way, and who are working to put resilience first, to find ways to better balance development and climate needs, to find ways to address both short-term vulnerabilities and longer-term priorities. So I welcome our panelists. I'm not going to introduce all of you at length because we do have a very tight window of time. For that reason, I'm also going to ask that you do please try to keep your interventions brief, meaning 2 to 3 minutes. I know it's a really big ask, but that way we can cover this very crucial ground that we would like to address. So I'd like to start out, if I may, by asking each of you to talk about the challenges that you are seeing in your own work, in your own institutions or companies, and how you're addressing those, how you are in fact working to transform the current development finance model. And I will begin, if I may, with the President of Uzbekistan. Welcome to you, Excellency.
Thank you. Well, you promoted me a lot. Our elections are coming on 9th of July, but I'm not planning to participate. I work for the Agency for Strategic Reforms under the President of Uzbekistan, and thank you for your question. But first of all, let me start thanking the OPEC Fund for inviting me to this very interesting forum. I learned a lot. As far as the challenges are concerned, the challenges as in any developing country, and especially in a country which is going through very rapid transformation under the leadership of our president, are not unique. And our president, in a similar way as His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Bhutan, mentioned about this logo of happiness for everybody, or gross national happiness. And as His Excellency, President of the Islamic Development Bank, mentioned that better educated, healthier, and better fed people are more capable in resolving the issues they face. Similar way, our major objective and targets of reform is to make people better, to provide them better living conditions, better income level, better paid jobs. And this requires, of course, a lot of investments in infrastructure. As far as infrastructure, we, as a double landlocked country, of course, face transport infrastructure development needs. In this very, unfortunately, rapidly changing climate situation, and we do feel its impact. We start facing water shortages. It's not that we used to be a very water-abundant country, but this water becomes extremely scarce resource and commodity in the region. And of course, energy and power, which is required by a growing country. By 2030, for example, our needs in power are doubling. So how we answer that? First of all, I have to thank all our development partners. Many of them are present here. And it's Islamic Development Bank, OPEC Fund, Saudi Development Fund, French Development Agency, ADB, and many, many others, the World Bank Group, who support us with development of infrastructure. But fiscal space of any country would not enable you to just go ahead and borrow even from development institutions. So the only solution is the private sector at all levels. So we try to bring a private sector, and we used very successfully IFC developed scaling solar way of bringing investors in renewables and in generation. And we plan to replicate it in many, many other sectors, and we're already in process doing that. I think I overrun my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll take away the promotion, Director General. Thank you very much for your remarks. I recently had the pleasure to visit your country in connection with the EBRD meeting and took the high-speed train from Tashkent to Samarkand, so certainly got to sample that bit of very impressive infrastructure that you have been building, and I look forward to hearing more about some of your other initiatives. But let me go now to the two international financial institutions on the panel, starting with the IFC, if I may. And Hela Shehuru is with us. She is the International Finance Corporation's Regional Vice President for Middle East, Central Asia, Turkey, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So to you as well, the same question, the challenges and whether you are working within the IFC to truly rebuild the development finance model.
Thank you very much. And I want to echo others' appreciation for Dr. Abdelhamid Al Khalifa and his team for an excellent organization and a very important forum. I'm very pleased to participate in the second after I participated last year in the inaugural forum. I believe a lot of the tenets of the World Bank Group Evolution Roadmap have been touched upon in the conversations that we've had this morning so far. When it comes to IFC, which is the private arm or private sector-oriented arm of the World Bank Group, our top three priorities in order to contribute to delivering a greater impact with existing financial resources, which is the challenge we all are facing today, are the following. Number one is to move the mobilization targets significantly upward. IFC has a very active mobilization team, both for debt and equity, and use a wide range of instruments for syndication, parallel financing that can be fast because it's an issue of time as well, to have already agreements in place that allow mobilization from private sources of finance and public sources of finance to private projects to happen as fast as possible, and we shorten the time that it takes to implement investments in emerging markets and developing economies. However, historically, we have had a 1-to-1 ratio between our own account investments and what we call core mobilization, which is a subset of the private capital mobilization definition that's common among development finance institutions. On private capital mobilization, we do a bit better, 2-to-1, but the new president of the World Bank Group, in response to the shareholders of the World Bank Group request, is asking us to be much bolder in these mobilization targets. And that's the number one area we are working on as a management team of IFC. The number two area on which we, and all of these are areas that are common among the development finance institutions present here today. The number two priority is to reinvigorate and revitalize the concept adopted a few years back of cascade approach. What does it mean? It means when considering a developmental challenge or an environmental challenge, can we think of how to leverage the most private sector-led solution with the least fiscal space requirement from countries? In other words, we have here illustrious representatives of the Arab Coordination Group. How can we, in a context where many of the emerging market developing economies' fiscal space is very tight, think always of public-private-led solutions such as governmental resources, sovereign loans can be used to leverage the most of private investments. And the third priority is to rethink about blended finance. And we discussed yesterday with the Arab Coordination Group leaders about OPEC Fund, IFC, and Arab Coordination Group initiative to mobilize blending solution for climate action to catalyze private sector. And this is premised on South-South opportunities, bringing capable and experienced sponsors from developing countries to other emerging market developing economies by using blending another time of just filling the viability gap that will trigger private investment, whether it's a first loss or it's some sort of guarantee, or it's even managing to absorb some of the currency risks that are preventing investment from flowing to many countries. Those are the three priorities we have in IFC for the World Bank Group Evolution Roadmap.
Wonderful, and we will take a deeper dive. That's why I'm encouraging you to perhaps leave it with that headline, and we'll come back to it shortly. I'd like to go now to Admaso Tadessa. He is the chairman of the Group Executive Management Board of the Eastern and Southern Africa Trade and Development Bank, TDB. And again, same question to you, sir. It's on. It's on.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and delighted to be here. Kudos to OPEC Fund and Abdelhamid. I see a lot of partners here. It's really an excellent gathering, very unusual. Very briefly, there are a number of challenges in our operating environment. I happen to be in the African context, and I think really it boils down to risk appetite. I think a lot has been said since we started this morning. And you know, when Stephanie pointed out 12% of MDB funding going to least developed regions or frontier markets, it kind of said it all. Right? Because I think we all gather and talk a lot about our aspirations and our intentions, but we all know that it's easy to talk, it's very hard to do. I happen to be in a region where there's a lot of frontier markets. And I'm very surprised to see so much positive intention, but so little action. 10 years ago, I used to come to forums like this and accuse my fellow grandee MDBs, the big MDBs, saying, you know, we don't see you so much in the neighborhood. And even though you're not in the neighborhood, I don't even see you dancing with me, and I'm as good as it gets in the neighborhood. So if you're not going to play with me, who are you going to play with? And I'm very pleased to say some credit is due, because in the past 10 years, something like 8 of the grandees have come into very strong partnerships with TDB Group. African Development Bank was at the forefront, but we have Badia here from CDE, OPEC Fund, of course, Abdelhamid and others have been very strong partners. And I think we've managed to do what Minister Mohammed spoke about earlier on when he gave his remarks. He said, well, we have to leverage one another and leverage others, including the private sector. And I think Stephanie talked about the importance of bringing in private sector. We heard the number of $146 trillion from President of AFDB, Adesina. Well, we said to ourselves, can we walk the talk? So we managed to reach out to pension funds, insurance companies, and other institutional investors such as sovereign wealth funds. And we asked them, since you don't seem to find deal flow enough in the region, why don't you come into an aggregator like TDB and join us in the fight to do more? And surprising to us, we thought in the beginning institutional investors wouldn't be so willing to come in, but they surprised us. Today, I can count almost 20 institutional investors who've come in and taken a form of risk capital, not lending, risk capital. So in the end, it's all about risk appetite. You go to some MDBs and you ask them to partner with you in our neighborhood, and then you hear people saying, investment grade, BB is the minimum we'll consider. I mean, how many of our frontier markets are BB, let alone investment grade? Even a great country like South Africa is no longer investment grade. So if you're an MDB and you're going to go out, you know, reciting rating agency references to investment grade, you're not going to do anything in Africa. So I really would like to challenge everybody to show us the numbers. It's one thing to say you have the money, but tell us it moves.
Thank you very much. And I saw... I saw Veronica Scotti nodding her head emphatically as you spoke at Master Tadessa. So let me go now to Veronica, and she is Managing Director of Public Sector Solutions at Swiss Re. Please, again, same question to you, transformation, how do we do it?
First of all, thank you for having me, Melinda, and thanks to the OPEC Fund. So yes, I was nodding, not too vigorously, I hope. And I was nodding because it's actually part of why my role even exists. So the panel is about positively transforming current development model for resilience and equity. And if I can point out one meta challenge that we all have, is the fact that still today, we're not looking at ex-ante preparedness as a transformative tool to address the issues that we're facing. So in as far as we go chasing after the problems have occurred, we hardly ever have a chance to actually build resilience. And so as an organization, as an industry, and definitely in my capacity, I am a strong believer and advocate for doing everything we can to be better prepared, which means moving all of the financing ex ante, moving all of the actions ex ante. Now, it may sound very easy to say rather than done. It's very well known that 55% of the crises and risks that we face can actually be predicted, but 98% of the funding go post-event. And that is a real drama for me personally, because I actually know that every time funding goes only into recovery, what that means is a lot of time spent in activities that actually could have been prevented. Money could have been used so much better. So we know that better preparedness can create huge dividends for economies. So I was nodding because as financial institutions that are dedicated to understanding risk, we think that a crucial problem is around risk understanding and is around finding appropriate mechanisms for transferring the risks across different agents of society. But the reality is my industry, my company, myself, we are dramatically failing if I look at the penetration of insurance around the world. And so I will continue to be a strong advocate for this thematic, because I think we need to work with governments to create a more collaborative spirit around embedding in economies insurance-like mechanisms, maybe kickstarting, catalyzing with government pools where there isn't a natural market developing, getting over the market hurdles, and working, as we do already with development institutions, to make sure that we can put an appropriate price on risk, making sure, and a lot of that price is actually around perceptions. So we can make a difference as a risk-bearing industry and as a risk-bearing company, and translate that into risk reduction actions, which should and will enable more capital flows for people that are sitting away from the global south. So I think when we intervene in these areas, we can be hugely transformative.
Thank you very much. I would like to use our second round of discussion, which, again, very limited time window for that, but to take a deeper dive on some of the points that all of you have raised. And let me start with resilience. Resilience in the face of climate change, resilience in terms of vulnerabilities that have, of course, deepened in the face of this confluence of crises that we see. And Director General Shukrat, if we look at Uzbekistan and its situation, you have been seeking to work together with other middle-income countries. You have been working increasingly closely with China. In fact, you recently signed a €1 billion agreement with China for additional financing. So perhaps you can talk about the South-South cooperation that is very important for you in your work to address some of the resilience issues.
Thank you. Indeed, resilience becomes an extremely important issue and topic in the current situation, and especially in our region, which is affected by many external factors. And our president actually understood and appreciated this importance of South-South relations in a very pragmatic and practical way. At one of the first initial meetings when we were brainstorming on how we can increase our exports, for example, how we can increase trade to support growth and be resilient, we were sharing our views that, oh, we'll reach African markets, we'll reach European market, we'll probably start exporting to the United States. And he asked, and what about neighbors, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Pakistan? And I said, well, it's difficult markets, it's not very attractive. And he said, how come you're going to reach the United States if you cannot reach your neighboring country? Start with neighboring countries. And he put a lot of efforts in improving our relations, trade, economic relations, and cooperations with neighboring countries. So we started working with neighbors. And our trade turnover with all neighboring countries increases at 3-4 times a year over the last 5-6 years, and you have completely different environment in the region. So one answer is working better with regional partners and regional countries. We do appreciate, and of course, our cooperation and partnership with China, but our south-to-south relations are not limited to China only. We managed to build and received a lot of support from GCC countries like United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, others. And we continue working with European countries. So we believe that diversification is another answer to ensure resilience.
Thank you very much. Very, very briefly, if I may, one quick follow-up question, because we talked and we've heard a lot this morning about how do we balance short-term vulnerabilities and longer-term priorities, including climate mitigation and adaptation. Your country is very dependent upon fossil fuels. What support do you need going forward to rebalance in the energy sector?
Well, addressing these vulnerabilities and reducing dependence on fossil fuels required us to introduce massively renewables. And we managed, with support of all developing partners present here, to attract over $8 billion of investments in renewable sectors over the last 5 years. So renewables are becoming an important part of our generation. But now we also need to replicate this experience with the rest of power sector, which unfortunately still faces a lot of losses, technical losses, commercial losses. So we need private sector in generation, not only generation, but transmission and distribution, and we look forward to work with partners on that.
Thank you very much. And then let's leap over to both the IFC and TDB to talk about that piece. Both of you mentioned what you're doing, the crucial importance of leveraging more private sector capital. And in fact, that is a key part of the business model of both of your organizations. Would you share, please, some concrete examples, some best practices that you see as encouraging for the future, because that is obviously one of the absolute top priorities that we are talking about here today. And I'll start with Hela.
Thank you, and I'll be super brief. I think Uzbekistan, starting with the Shukratva 5, is one of those emerging market developing economies that bring us what the private sector needs. Private sector can deal with risk, but cannot deal with uncertainty. So having a policy environment which is predictable and which is friendly to private investors allows us to cut through. So indeed, one of the examples is that IFC has supported the UAE-led largest Central Asia wind farm this year, Zarafshan, and that's thanks to an enabling environment and also South-South cooperation. Another example this year is we financed the first blue loan in the leasing industry in Turkey. Turkey, of course, is also a water-stressed country, and thematic lending, blue, green, sustainability, is very important to incentivize this kind of action for resilience and for climate action. And I would like to clarify that adaptation is a today priority equally, just like mitigation. And finally, we launched the first green bond in the Levant countries through the Jordanian Kuwaiti bank green bond. And these are very good precedents to build upon.
Chairman Tadessa?
Yeah, thank you. Just to give a live example, one of the things that we try to do to help the private sector do more trade with Africa, that's one of our mandate areas, is we try to credit enhance, help not de-risk, but reduce the risk of transacting between importers and exporters. So there is a very strong buyer of a particular product from Morocco. The buyer is in East Africa. It's an input that's necessary for food security and agriculture. But of course, the exporter in Morocco didn't feel comfortable with the risk of the buyer. So the letter of credit wasn't strong enough. So we stepped in and credit enhanced the LC so that the East African buyer can make an effective transaction with this exporter in Morocco. But the volumes became too big for us. As Franny said, we are all constrained by capital and rating agency perspectives, so we had to find a partner to join hands in that transaction, hundreds of millions of dollars. So we found a willing partner in Badia. So we asked Badia, join hands and let us do more. So this is how we're multiplying, this is how we're leveraging, right? And it's supporting the all-important sector of food and agriculture. But if we tried to do it alone, we wouldn't be as effective. So that's just one case. Another case was a pension fund that believed us and took a risk capital position in us. And they said, we're not doing it just to strengthen your capital. We need deal flow. And you're closer to the ground. You only cover 20 or so countries, unlike other MDBs. So we think you can help us do more with the private sector. And so what we managed to do is find a very interesting transaction, which was a telecommunications company that was being transferred from a privately held investor, and they wanted to list it on a stock market, on an exchange. And so we basically acted as the handmaiden. We got the mandate. We did the advisory work. We provided the bridge financing to help the foreign investor exit from Africa. They exited Africa. We warehoused the deal and enabled the pension fund to come in and take 25% of this blue chip company, which had been privately held by a foreign investor for almost 100 years. And this pension fund is so happy now that they have more than government paper in their portfolio, because anybody who knows pension funds, most of the time, they just buy government securities. And in this case, they ended up with a beautiful telecom company in their portfolio, and it's very profitable. It's almost a monopoly. And they said, well, if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have had access to this interesting, blue chip opportunity. So we act as a handmaiden for the private sector, and we try to build confidence. And in the process, they give us a bit of love and put capital into us as well.
Thank you very much for that. And let me go back to Veronica, also with the request that you share a couple of concrete examples, including in the area of insurance, because you mentioned the importance of that. And again, that is an innovative solution to try to perhaps refocus the development finance structures that we know. But in that context, if you would also very briefly talk about the report that Swiss Re is about to present on resilience, because I know that that serves as the basis for a lot of the work that you do with the most vulnerable. And so if you can weave those two together in around 2 minutes or less, that would be great.
Okay, so I'll do it super quickly. So tomorrow we'll be releasing this report, and we're analyzing in particular 3 sectors of the economy globally. And our estimate is that we need about 100 billion to build adaptation resilience, and that's specifically against climate change. And we will need 3 times as much if we were to do it across all economic sectors in the global south. So it's a lot of money that need to be financed. And as I said, I do think sincerely that through reform of markets around innovative insurance structures that today still are not accepted in most countries. For instance, parametric insurance, which can get around a big issue with data, or by introducing laws for microinsurance, we could really help mobilize more insurance capital towards most vulnerable populations. Simple things that don't cost money. They just create the regulatory certainty that would allow us to do more. But I want to give some very quick examples of why I actually think insurance and risk preparedness can be so transversal and transformative. So, for instance, we work with the World Bank on a project in East Africa called DRIVE. We work together with ZEPRI, so I'm a big believer in developing local market capacity, and ZEPRI has been a fantastic partner in this sense. And we are about 2 years ahead of schedule in protecting pastoralists in East Africa. 2 years ahead of schedule. We are already covering over 2 million people with affordable insurance that is actually preventative, so it's triggering before events happen. Nepal, we helped finance a hydropower station that was critical for the energy security of the country after we were told that it was impossible to get it protected following the earthquake. And that could be done because we developed a parametric insurance cover and a 5-year cover that protected the MDBs with accredited, see-through protection. We're very delighted to be working with IRENA on the ETAP platform that is about energy transition accelerator platform that really strives to put together the capital stack of various multilateral organizations and ourselves as a contingent capital forum towards the global south. We're seeing an amazing pipeline of projects that we had not seen up until a year ago. Chile, we took the risk of the country against earthquake to market through the World Bank Treasury, the largest sovereign risk placed in the market this year. DFC, the Development Finance Corporation of the US, and Galapagos, and that for nature swap. So in Ethiopia, we managed together with MIGA to bring telecommunication in a country that does not have necessarily a good country risk. But together, we can help bring telecommunication, which is a foundational infrastructure to the country. So, Melinda, I'm rushing through this, but the point is, it can be done.
Thank you so much, Veronica. I think I think Veronica spoke faster and faster as she went down that list. But in fact, we will have the opportunity to hear more about a few of those initiatives, including ATAF, later on today in our closing panel. Before you go, one last very quick question to all of you, because we've talked a lot about the need for greater collaboration also between institutions and for the need for joined up action. So in 30 seconds or less, what is the single most important priority or action that you will be taking, each of you, in future to work together with other key stakeholders? Director General?
Well, it's obvious we'll continue working on improving our legal framework, our regulations, to making it more enabling for private sector and empowering not only large corporations, large companies, but also all levels, starting from most poor and vulnerable. For example, we're working with Islamic Development Bank on a special economic empowerment fund, which will be another instrument to bring private sector at all levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Veronica.
I've discovered, Melinda, in the last 5 years that working through aggregators can be hugely transformative, so I will continue to work through aggregators and platforms to really scale up quickly.
Thank you. Hela?
Well, maybe I can mention that the IFC is moving towards a model of originating to distribute. So finding ways that from the outset, when we are structuring or intervening in a program, or and also adopting programmatic approaches, how to replicate and how to crowd in others faster and more systematically. So originating upfront, knowing that a large share will be put in a system of distribution towards the financial markets.
Thank you very much. And finally, Admasu.
Well, multiplying our impact is our strategy, and we've done that very well in recent years through partnerships. We've seen the power of partnerships. What I'd like to do is deepen those partnerships and extend them after this meeting. Hopefully, what Lerato said at the opening, mindsets will change. With changed mindsets, I think more partnerships is possible.
Thank you. Perfect closing sentence for this panel on a transformative development model. Many, many thanks to all of you for being with us and for your contributions to this very thought-provoking and ultimately optimistically ending panel discussion. So much appreciated. Let's give them a warm round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen.